There is a specific moment when you stop living and begin only to exist. You can perceive that this occurs in such a gradual way that it goes unnoticed. An entire week is reduced to car rides, trainings, games, and then it starts all over again. And Steph Curry felt this. There were 7 years of existence in this pattern. Success? Yes. Championships? Yes. But something fundamental was missing. On that Tuesday afternoon, Curry drove through the streets of Oakland, alone, without a script, without an agenda, just driving. The streets that he had known since childhood flowed around him. But now they were different, more empty. Or perhaps he was emptier. It was impossible not to feel that sensation of emptiness while passing through the streets where he grew up. Oakland had changed. Or perhaps it had remained the same, and it was he who had changed. Privilege has the quality of distancing. The more you gain, the farther you become from what gave origin to you. And it is in that emptiness that you frequently find truth. Curry drove without a specific direction. This was rare. His life was mapped out, calendars filled, every minute allocated. But today, not. Today, he just let the car follow and turned onto streets that he had not visited in years. It was then that he passed by the bridge. The bridge in Oakland where vagabonds sleep, where the city ignores its problems, where invisibility has an official address. Curry had passed hundreds of times. He had never stopped. He had never recognized the humanity underneath that concrete. But on that day, there was something different. Because you can perceive when something calls to you, when the universe asks you to pay attention. Curry felt this. He parked the car. He had not planned this. His body just stopped. He got out of the car. The streets were quiet. Sounds of the distant city. And underneath the bridge, underneath it, multiple people slept. Some in sleeping bags, others just in cardboard. Invisibility, made into structure. Curry walked, and it was when he saw a man, older, sleeping on cardboard, thin, worn, gray hair, torn clothes, the type of person that the world learned not to see. But there was something in him, something that activated an old memory of Curry, something familiar, curve of face, manner of being. That face. It was not possible. Curry approached closer, carefully. He did not want to scare, just observe, to confirm or deny what he was thinking. And when he approached, close enough, he saw. He saw the truth in that devastated face. It was Marcus Thompson. Marcus Thompson, his father's best friend. The man who had disappeared when Curry was a child. The man who had been an uncle, not by blood, but by bond. The man who had taught Curry some of his first lessons about loyalty, character, and what it means to be a real man. Marcus Thompson, sleeping underneath a bridge in Oakland. Curry sat down beside him. He did not wake him. He simply sat. Because you can perceive when you are witnessing something that changes you. When truth strikes with such force that it transforms. 15 years. Marcus had disappeared 15 years ago. Curry had once asked his father, "Where is Marcus?" And his father had responded with painful silence. And then he never asked again. Because this is what we learn. We let people go. We naturalize disappearance. But here was Marcus, alive, breathing, but broken in ways that Curry had never imagined. Curry touched gently on Marcus's shoulder. Not rudely, not with shock, just presence. Marcus awoke gradually, confused, frightened. This is the natural reaction of people on the street. Every awakening is the uncertainty of who woke you and why. "Marcus," said Curry, and there was a tremor in his voice. "Is it you?" Marcus blinked. His eyes tried to focus, and then recognition. "Steph?" The name came out as a question, as if it could not be true. "Is it really you?" "It is me," said Curry, "and you can perceive when someone is trying to process reality that does not fit. I found you." And then Marcus began to cry. Not small sobs, but deep crying from someone who had not cried in a very long time. Crying of shame, crying of relief, crying of a man who had been invisible and suddenly was seen. "I am sorry," said Marcus, and the first words he managed to say were an apology for existing. "I am sorry. I did not want to. I should not be here." "Shh," said Curry, and he sat down completely beside Marcus under that bridge. "Nobody should be here, but you are. And now you are not alone anymore." It is impossible not to feel the intensity of that first encounter. Curry, initially, just let Marcus cry, because sometimes presence is more than words. Later, when tears diminished, Curry asked, "What happened, Marcus? How did you get here?" And Marcus responded with the version that all the homeless learn to say, "I just had bad luck, Steph. It is not a big deal. I am fine." But Curry did not accept this, because you can perceive when someone is denying truth. And Curry refused that denial. "Nobody ends up here by bad luck," said Curry, and there was firmness in his voice. "Nobody chooses this place. Something broke, Marcus, and I need to know what, because I am here now, and you will not be on this bridge anymore." Marcus looked at him, and in that look there was hope so fragile that it could be broken by a whisper. "Do you really want to know?" asked Marcus. "Yes," said Curry. "I want to, and then I will get you out of here." And this is how transformations begin, not with a great plan, but with a simple promise, with genuine presence, with the refusal to let a person remain invisible. And so, on that Tuesday afternoon in Oakland, underneath the bridge where the city makes its problems invisible, Steph Curry found more than a man. He found purpose. He found a reason for his 7 years of existence. He found a way to honor the one who raised him. And when he said to that devastated man, "You will not be on this bridge anymore," something fundamental changed in the universe. Because redemption does not begin with a great gesture. It begins with someone who cares enough to stop, to see, to say, "You matter." And when those words are said with truth, when they come from someone who truly believes, then lives change, because invisibility can be broken. And it all begins with a person who refuses to let you disappear. But before Curry could really save Marcus, he needed to understand Marcus. Because rescuing a life means understanding how that life was broken. And breakage is never simple. It is always a series of events that, seen in isolation, seem small. But together they form an avalanche. Curry took Marcus to the best hotel in Oakland. Not because Marcus asked, but because Curry understood something fundamental. The first thing that someone without a home needs is to be restored to dignity. And dignity begins with a hot shower. You can perceive transformation when someone goes from invisibility to restored humanity. Marcus entered the hotel bathroom and stayed there. Just stayed, observing the shower, observing clean towels, observing the mirror that reflected a face that he had forgotten he had. When he came out, an hour later, he was a different man. Not because his appearance had changed so drastically, but because he had been touched by dignity. The one who slept under the bridge now slept in a real bed. And sleep in a real bed is different. It is sleep that restores. The next morning, when Marcus woke up, Curry was there. Simple coffee and presence. Because Curry understood that presence was everything that Marcus had lost. "Thank you," said Marcus, "and you can perceive when words carry the weight of 15 years. I did not deserve this." "You deserve much more than this," responded Curry, "and we are going to talk about everything. About how you ended up under that bridge. About what happened. Because I need to understand. And this is how real stories begin. Not with a great revelation, but with questions asked with genuine compassion." Marcus told his story in fragments over the days, not all at once. Because trauma is revealed in layers. You cannot process complete breakage in a single moment. Marcus Thompson had been an engineer, respected, stable. He worked for 22 years at the same company. He started as an ambitious young man and worked his way into a leadership position. He built a reputation. He built a life. "I loved my work," said Marcus, and there was longing in that longing. It was more than a job. It was identity. It was how I defined who I was. He had bought a house in a good neighborhood in Oakland. He married an incredible woman, Sarah. They had a daughter, Michelle. It was everything that anyone could want. Financial security, love, community, deep friendships, including that of Dell Curry, his best friend since childhood. "You two were inseparable," said Curry. "I remember this. You came to our house. You and my father were like brothers." "We were," responded Marcus, and tears began to descend. And then, everything changed. Approximately 15 years ago, the company where Marcus worked went through restructuring. This was common in the 2000 years. Companies optimized. Optimization meant cuts, and Marcus was one of the cut. At 52 years old, being cut from a job of 22 years is more than a loss of income. It is a loss of identity. It is a loss of the structure that defined his days. "I thought it would be easy to find a new job," said Marcus. "I had experience. I had references. I had education." But the market did not care. He was too old for startups, too young for retirement. He was in a professional vacuum. While looking for work, Sarah was diagnosed with cancer. You can perceive when the universe tests you beyond what you can endure. When one bad thing becomes two. When two become three. When you run out of ground beneath your feet. "From that moment," said Marcus, "everything that I built began to disintegrate. Medical bills grew. Their savings were drained. Marcus continued to look for work, but now, with the stress of his wife's health, consuming everything. Sarah died. Cancer took her in 18 months. Too fast. Without time to say goodbye. Without time to prepare. And when she died, Marcus died too. Not physically, but spiritually. The one who had been a husband, father, engineer, friend, became a man who could not get out of bed. "I did not understand mourning at that time," said Marcus, and you can perceive the depth of pain in his silence. "I thought it was weakness, that I should just continue, make money, pay bills, be a man. But you cannot just continue when everything that sustained you has been removed, when death redefines your life, when a true partner is ripped away." Marcus did not look for work anymore. He could not. Michelle, his daughter, was in college, and he could not pay any more. She left college. She moved to help her father. But her father could not accept help, because accepting help was an admission of failure. "I pushed her away," said Marcus, and this was what broke Curry. "I pushed away my daughter because I could not face her, because I was ashamed, because I did not want her to see the broken man that I had become." Marcus began to drink, first to sleep, then to breathe, then to exist. He lost his house. He lost the job he'd obtained because he could not work while he was drunk. He lost any remaining structure. And at some point, instead of asking for help, he simply left. He left everything. He left his daughter. He left his community. He left his life. "I thought I was doing her a favor," said Marcus. "I thought it would be better if I disappeared, if she did not have to take care of a father who is an alcoholic and depressed." And so Marcus disappeared. Not dramatically, gradually. He stopped contacting Dell because he was ashamed. He stopped contacting his community. He stopped contacting his daughter because he could not face the disappointment in her. For 15 years, Marcus slept on different streets, parks, bridges, abandoned buildings. Invisibility became existence. People learn not to see the homeless. So Marcus learned to be invisible. "Do you know the worst part?" asked Marcus, and there was a tremor in his voice that Curry had recognized. "It was not being on the street. It was believing that I deserved to be there, that I was too broken to be fixed, that nobody wanted to save me, that my daughter hated me, that Dell had forgotten me long ago." You can perceive how narratives that we tell ourselves become prisons. Marcus had built a narrative that he was beyond redemption, and that narrative kept him under the bridge for 15 years. Curry cried while listening, not out of pity, but out of recognition. Recognition of how fragile life is, how quickly it can disintegrate. How easy it is for a person to disappear completely when the system fails and the absence of compassion solidifies the fall. "Marcus," said Curry, and there was a tremor in his voice, "you are not broken. You were broken. There is a difference. Broken means end, but you were broken, and you are still here. That means you are resilience. That means you are survival. That means you are redemption, waiting only to be recognized." And Marcus cried again. But this time, it was a different cry. It was the cry of someone who had been seen. After 15 years, there was someone who saw him as more than a vagrant, as a man who mattered. And so, the story of Marcus was not a story of random misfortune. It was not a story of a man who simply had bad luck. It was a story of a man who lost his way because nobody looked for him. It was a story of a system that did not show up when it needed to show up. It was a story of isolation that could have continued forever if Curry had not driven under that bridge on that specific day. Because this is how invisibility works, not through sudden disappearance, but through progressive negligence. And this is how redemption begins, not through a great plan, but through someone who refuses to let negligence win. But rescuing Marcus was not a responsibility that Curry could carry alone. Because Marcus was not just a victim of personal misfortune, he was a victim of relational disconnection. And you only reconnect relationships by bringing people back. Curry drove to his father's house that night. He had not called ahead, because this conversation could not be done over the phone. It had to be done presence to presence. Dell Curry was watching a game when his son arrived, surprised to see him so late. But Curry knew that his father would feel the weight of the news before even the words were said. "Dad, I need to tell you something," said Curry. "And you can perceive when someone is about to redirect the lives of people they love. I found Marcus. The silence that followed was dense. Dell slowly put down the remote control. His face changed color. Marcus Thompson? Yes, said Curry. I found him underneath a bridge in Oakland. Dad, he is alive, but he is broken. And then Curry told everything. How Marcus had disappeared. How he had lost his wife, his job, his daughter. How he had spent 15 years invisible. How he had built a narrative that he was beyond redemption. And as Curry spoke, he saw something break in his father. Not in a dramatic way, but fundamentally. Because this was a friend that Dell had loved. A friend who had disappeared. A friend that his father had never looked for. I should have looked for you, said Dell, and it was not a question. It was a confession. I should not have let you simply disappear. Marcus believes that you forgot him, said Curry. He believes that nobody cared. We cared, responded Dell. I cared. I just did not know how to look. When someone disappears, you start to believe that they do not want to be found. You can perceive how shared guilt becomes a bridge. Dell had felt the same guilt as Marcus. Both believed that the failure was theirs. I need you to come, said Curry. I need you to see Marcus. I need you to tell him that you still care. I need you to say that your friendship still matters. And Dell simply nodded. Because there were things that needed to be repaired. Curry took his father to the hotel where Marcus was staying. That morning, Marcus had taken another shower. He was visibly better, more present. But he still carried the weight of 15 years. When Dell entered the room, Marcus was at the window, observing the city. When he turned and saw Dell, something changed in his face. Recognition, shock, memory of who he had been to this man. Marcus, said Dell, and there was a tremor so deep that Curry saw it. Dell, responded Marcus, and you can perceive when two people are meeting across an abyss of time. How did you find me? Steph found me, responded Dell, and he told me everything. And then Dell did something that redefined the moment. He simply hugged Marcus. Not with awkwardness, not with pity, but with the love of someone who had lost a friend and finally found him. I should have looked for you, said Dell and cried. I should not have let you disappear. I should have. I am sorry. I am sorry. You are here now, said Marcus, and at that moment, both men understood. The past could not be changed, but the future could be. The conversation that followed was long. Hours of memories, stories of childhood, remembrance of a friendship that had been more important than anything else, and mutual understanding that this friendship had not died. It had just been sleeping. While the emotional story unfolded, Curry also initiated practical restoration. Marcus went to a medical clinic, complete exams, mental health evaluation, diagnosed with PTSD, severe depression, alcoholism problem. All treatable, none of them fatal. Curry took him to the best doctors in San Francisco. Medication, therapy, real recovery structure. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus had access to care, and you can perceive how the body responds when the mind begins to believe that it deserves care. Marcus began to sleep better. He gained weight. His eyes began to shine again. The engineer that he had been, in layers, began to emerge. But complete redemption could not occur without reconciliation with his daughter. Michelle, now 35 years old, had lived her entire adult life believing that her father had abandoned her, that he had chosen the street instead of his daughter. Curry made contact initially. He explained that he had found her father, that her father had spent 15 years without a home, that her father had not voluntarily abandoned her, that her father was trying to come back. Michelle was reluctant, because it is difficult to let go of the hate that was built over decades. It is difficult to reconsider the narrative that defines your pain. "He left me," said Michelle. "When I needed him the most, he disappeared." "He did not leave you," responded Curry with firm compassion. "He lost himself. And when you are lost, you cannot be there for anyone. Do you understand the difference?" And Michelle, slowly, began to understand. That abandonment was not necessarily acts of rejection. Sometimes it was a symptom of a broken man who did not know how to ask for help. Curry facilitated the reunion. He suggested a neutral cafe, a place where lives could be reformulated. When Michelle saw her father for the first time in 15 years, she saw a different man. He was still her father. But he was also a survivor. He was also vulnerable. He was also human. "Daughter," said Marcus, and you can perceive when a simple word carries the weight of forgiveness. "I am sorry for everything you went through. I am sorry for being absent. But I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped loving you." And Michelle, who had planned to be strong, to be indifferent, simply fell. Because there is strength that comes from letting go of hate. But then Michelle did something extraordinary. She brought her daughter, Sophia, Marcus's granddaughter, a child of 8 years old who had never known her grandfather. "Sophia," said Michelle, and there was a tremor in her voice. "This is your grandfather. Marcus, he was lost, but now he has been found." Sophia, with the innocence of a child, simply hugged the man. Because a child does not carry the hate of decades. A child just sees a person and loves. And Marcus cried. But this time it was not the cry of desperation. It was the cry of a grandfather meeting his granddaughter. It was the cry of a man who had lost hope of any connection and was receiving a second chance. "Hi, Grandpa," said Sophia, and Marcus responded, "Hi, my daughter. Hi, my love." Weeks passed. Marcus gained stability, a home, community. But he needed something more. Purpose. Curry connected him with a community rehabilitation program in Oakland, a program that helped the homeless. And Marcus, with his lived experience, with his deep understanding of how to fall, became a mentor. You can perceive how trauma, when processed, can become strength. Marcus had been underneath a bridge. Now he was helping others to get out. Dozens of people. Hundreds, eventually. Men who were broken finding hope in a man who had been broken and was restored. "Do you know what is funny?" said Marcus to Curry one night. "I spent 15 years believing that my fall was the end. But my fall taught me things that nothing else could. It taught me compassion. It taught me humility. It taught me that redemption is possible." And so, he who had disappeared reappeared. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not as a man broken beyond redemption, but as a man who had been broken, restored, and discovered that his own journey of fall and ascent was precisely what allowed him to lift others. Because this is how redemption works. Not through someone who never fell, but through someone who fell, was rescued, and decided never to let another fall alone. And it was then that the transformation began to unfold. Not just in Marcus's life, but in the lives of everyone who touched his story. Because there is something about genuine redemption that reverberates far beyond the individual who is saved. Redemption changes the world around it. Marcus now had an address. He had a job. He had family. He had purpose. Everything that he had lost was being slowly restored. Not perfectly, because life is not perfect, but genuinely. He lived in an apartment in Oakland. Small, but it was his. He had a key. He had privacy. He had restored dignity. Every morning he woke up in a real bed. Every night he slept under a roof. Things that the majority of people never understand the value of until they lose them. He worked in a community program as a mentor. He helped men to get off the street. His work was not theoretical. It was lived. Because Marcus had been underneath the bridge, he had slept in the cold. He had been invisible. And now he was visible. And he used that visibility to help others. His daughter visited regularly. Michelle had learned to trust again. Not instantly, but gradually. Seeing her father show consistency. Seeing that commitment was real. Seeing that redemption was possible. And Sophia, his granddaughter, now knew her grandfather. She had a grandfather who loved her, who told stories, who picked her up when she fell, who built a relationship that should have always existed. "Do you know what is strange?" said Marcus to Curry one night. "I spent 15 years believing that my life had ended, that I would never have a second chance. But here I am, with work that matters, with a daughter who forgave me, with a granddaughter who loves me, with my best friend back. It is like living two lives." You can perceive when someone really understands the present because they almost lost everything. Curry decided to tell Marcus's story, not because Marcus asked, but because Curry understood that personal stories of redemption are powerful tools for social transformation. He connected with Steph A. Smith. He shared Marcus's story. He asked for help in amplifying it responsibly, not as an exploit, but as education, as inspiration, as a catalyst. The story came out on a podcast, then in an article, then in a video, and something extraordinary began to happen. People began to recognize the homeless in their communities. They began to stop. They began to ask names. They began to offer presents. They began to refuse to let people disappear invisibly. Reports came that rehabilitation programs received more funding because Marcus's story showed that rehabilitation works, that lives can be saved, that redemption is possible. Messages began to arrive from people who had found Curry through social networks, telling stories of their own Marcus. Men who found lost friends, daughters who forgave fathers, fathers who looked for sons, all connected by the idea that nobody should disappear alone. It is impossible not to feel when a single action creates a collective movement. Curry, through the process of saving Marcus, had found the thing that he had been looking for: authentic purpose. Basketball had given him fame. It had given him wealth. It had given him access. But it had left emptiness because it was empty of greater meaning. By saving Marcus, Curry had found real meaning. He had discovered that his privilege was not meant for personal consumption. It was meant for service. He started a formal mentoring program for the homeless in the San Francisco Bay Area. Not because it was social responsibility, but because he now understood that it was his true work. "Do you know what changed?" said Curry in a later interview. "I thought that my work was to play basketball, but my work was always to reach out to those who fall. Basketball was simply a platform until I understood my true calling." And you can perceive how understanding purpose changes a person completely. Curry continued to play, but he played with renewed purpose. Every victory was not just about himself. It was about the program that could expand. It was about the lives that he could touch. Marcus, in a moment of reflection, thought about that Tuesday underneath the EK bridge. That day when he had stopped existing and had begun to live again. "If Curry had not driven underneath that bridge," said Marcus, "I would have died there. Not immediately, but I would have, because invisibility is a slow death, and I was dying." But Marcus did not die. Marcus rose again, and when he rose again, he understood that his fall had not been an end. It had been preparation. Preparation for the work that he now did. Preparation for the mentor that he now was. "Every man that I helped to get off the street," continued Marcus, "is because I understood what it means to be there, and because someone cared enough to get me out of there." You can perceive when suffering is transformed into purpose, when personal pain becomes a tool to serve another. This is what converts trauma into transcendence. Dell had carried the guilt of not having looked for Marcus, guilt that the friendship had died through negligence. But the encounter with Marcus had freed him from that guilt, because he understood that the friendship had not died. It had just been sleeping. And when it awakened, it was as strong as it had always been. "The guilt that I carried," said Dell, "was because I had believed that friendship was fragile, that if you let a person go, they disappear forever. But Marcus was there all along, and when I arrived, he was there waiting, because true friendship does not die. It just waits." Dell also became involved in the program. He supported it financially. He mentored personally. Because he had learned that his youth had been defined by friendship, and his old age could be defined by the restoration of that friendship. Marcus's story spread beyond San Francisco. It became a symbol of possible redemption. It became inspiration for other people to look for friends and family members who had disappeared rehabilitation programs, to expand communities to invest in the well-being of the homeless people, to recognize humanity in invisibility. Hundreds of lives were directly touched by Marcus's work. Thousands indirectly. All because Curry had driven underneath a bridge and refused to let someone remain invisible. Years later, Marcus in his office at the program. He was now a coordinator. He helped dozens of young men. He had authority. He had a title. But more importantly, he had purpose. He saw a young man on the street. He recognized that emptiness, that isolation, that desperation of someone who had given up. Marcus got out of his car. He approached. "Hey," said Marcus with gentleness, "have you eaten anything today?" The young man ignored him. Because it is what invisible people do. They ignore those who try to see them. "My name is Marcus," he continued. "I have been there, under a bridge just like you, for 15 years. And at that moment, the young man looked at Marcus, really looked, and saw. "Come," said Marcus, "you do not need to sleep on the street. Let me show you that you matter. Let me show you that redemption is possible." And so, the cycle continued. One compassionate action multiplied. One saved life, became salvation hard, became a bridge to another life. And so this is how worlds change, not through a great public gesture, not through eloquent speech in a crowded arena, but through the private action of genuine compassion. One man sees another man. He recognizes humanity where the world sees only absence. He offers presence where the world offers negligence. And everything changes. Because redemption is not a personal achievement. It is the recognition that we all deserve a second chance, that we all deserve to be seen, that invisibility is an oppression that can be healed with the true gaze of someone who cares. Marcus Thompson was not saved by money. Money was just a tool. Marcus was saved by visibility, by someone who saw him as a man who mattered, by someone who refused to let negligence win. And when you experience redemption this way, when you feel the weight of being truly seen after years of invisibility, you can never again be indifferent. You can never again pass someone on the street without recognizing that there is a complete life. There is a complete story. There is humanity that deserves to be seen. And this is how redemption spreads, not through imposition, but through the contagion of genuine compassion. One act of mercy inspires another. One saved life becomes salvation hard. A cycle of redemption that never ends. Because when you save someone, you do not just change that person's life. You change your own life. You understand your purpose. You discover that the invisibility that you also carried is healed when you become visible to another. This is redemption. It is not salvation. It is mutual restoration. It is a cycle of compassion that reminds all of us why we are here, why we live, why it matters. Marcus Thompson was not Curry's salvation. Curry was Marcus's awakener. Together, they saved each other, and they continue to save others. Because this is the thing about true redemption. It never ends. It spreads. It multiplies. It becomes a legacy that persists.